The blood-soaked handkerchief fell from Sarah Zimmerman's trembling fingers as she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, the angry purple bruise blooming across her left cheekbone a stark reminder of what smiling, or rather, not smiling, had cost her in Guthrie, Oklahoma Territory, 1889. Sarah had arrived in Guthrie just 3 weeks earlier. Traveling west after her parents' deaths in Philadelphia left her with nothing but debts and painful memories. At 22, she'd hoped the Oklahoma land rush would offer a fresh start, a place where she could build something of her own. She'd sold nearly everything she owned to purchase a train ticket and a small plot of land on the outskirts of the newly formed town. Her new home was little more than a shabby one-room cabin that leaked when it rained, but it was hers. She'd found work as a seamstress at Mrs. Holloway's dress shop on Main Street, where her fine needlework earned her enough to eat and slowly furnish her sparse dwelling. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and Sarah had begun to believe that perhaps she could make a life here after all. That was before Edgar Wilkins had taken an interest in her. Edgar owned the largest saloon in Guthrie, a man of considerable wealth and influence who was accustomed to getting what he wanted. What he wanted, it seemed, was Sarah. When she'd delivered a repaired vest to his establishment yesterday afternoon, he'd cornered her behind the bar, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against her face as he pressed himself against her. "Pretty little thing, like you shouldn't look so serious all the time," he'd slurred, his meaty hand gripping her wrist. "Give us a smile, darlin' Dot." Sarah had tried to pull away, keeping her expression neutral. "I need to get back to work, Mr. Wilkins. Mrs. Holloway is expecting me." His grip had tightened. "I said smile?" When she'd refused, his open palm had connected with her face with enough force to send her sprawling against the wall. The pain had exploded across her cheek, bright and sudden, and she tasted blood where her teeth cut into her inner lip. "Next time I ask for a smile, you'd best give it to me," Edgar had snarled, towering over her. "Nobody says no to me in this town." Sarah had fled, tears blurring her vision as she'd stumbled back to her cabin, ignoring the curious, and sometimes pitying glances of the townspeople. She hadn't returned to Mrs. Holloway's today, too ashamed of her bruised face and too afraid of encountering Edgar again. Now, as she dabbed at her split lip, Sarah wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake coming to Oklahoma Territory. Perhaps she should have stayed in Philadelphia, found work as a maid or taken in washing. At least there she'd understood the rules, knew what was expected of her. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Sarah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Had Edgar come to finish what he'd started? "Miss? Are you in there?" The voice was deep but gentle, unfamiliar. Sarah remained silent, praying whoever it was would leave. The knock came again, more insistent. "Miss Zimmerman? Mrs. Holloway sent me to check on you. Said you didn't come in today?" Cautiously, Sarah approached the door, keeping to the side so she couldn't be seen through the small window. "Who are you?" "Name's Thomas Nash, madam. I run the cattle operation north of town. I was picking up a shirt Mrs. Holloway mended for me, and she mentioned she was worried about you." Sarah hesitated, then cracked the door open just enough to peer out with her uninjured eye. The man standing on her porch was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim and a faded blue shirt. His face was tanned from the sun, with kind eyes the color of warm whiskey and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. A battered cowboy hat was clutched in his hands. "I'm fine," Sarah said, trying to keep the bruised side of her face hidden. "Please thank Mrs. Holloway for her concern, but I just needed a day of rest." Thomas Nash's expression shifted as he caught a glimpse of her injury. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment but in barely contained anger. "Who did that to you, Miss Zimmerman?" "Nobody. I fell," Sarah replied automatically, the lie bitter on her tongue. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Begging your pardon, madam, but that ain't no fall mark. That's the kind of bruise a man's hand leaves behind." Sarah swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She didn't know this man, had no reason to trust him, yet something in his steady gaze made her want to tell the truth. "It doesn't matter. There's nothing to be done about it. There's always something to be done about men who put their hands on women, Thomas said quietly, his voice low and dangerous. Was it Edgar Wilkins? Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. How did you? Wilkins has a reputation, Thomas explained, his expression grim. You're not the first woman he's hurt, just the newest in town. A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek before she could stop it. He wanted me to smile for him. When I wouldn't. She gestured helplessly at her face. Thomas's hands tightened on his hat. Miss Zimmerman, I'd like to help you, if you'll let me. Why would you want to help me? You don't even know me. Because no one deserves to be treated that way, he answered simply. And because I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. The sincerity in his voice made Sarah want to believe him, but years of disappointment had taught her caution. What could you possibly do? Thomas Nash looked her directly in the eyes, his gaze unwavering. For starters, I can make sure Wilkins never lays a hand on you again. And given some time, Miss Zimmerman. He paused, a small, gentle smile touching his lips. I'll give you a reason to smile again. A real one, when you're ready. Something about his words, about the quiet confidence with which he spoke them, made Sarah's heart skip a beat. For the first time since arriving in Guthrie, she felt a tiny spark of hope. May I come in, Miss Zimmerman? I think we have some planning to do. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah opened the door wider, letting Thomas Nash step into her small cabin and, though she didn't know it yet, into her life. Thomas removed his hat as he entered, his tall frame making the small cabin seem even tinier. His eyes took in the sparse furnishings: a narrow bed in one corner, a rickety table with a single chair, a small cook-stove, and little else. A few books were stacked neatly beside the bed, and some fabric and sewing materials were organized on a shelf. It's not much, Sarah said, suddenly self-conscious about her humble dwelling. It's clean and it's yours, Thomas replied. That counts for something in my book. Sarah gestured to the chair. Please sit. I don't have much to offer, but there's water if you're thirsty. Water would be fine, thank you. As Sarah poured a cup from her pitcher, Thomas settled his large frame onto the chair, which creaked under his weight. She handed him the water and then perched on the edge of her bed, keeping some distance between them. How do you know Edgar Wilkins? She asked. Thomas took a sip before answering. Our paths have crossed a few times. I don't frequent his establishment, I prefer quieter company, but I know his kind. Men who think their money gives them the right to whatever they want, whoever they want. His eyes flicked to her bruised face, and his expression hardened. He needs to be taught that's not how things work. You plan to fight him? Sarah asked, alarmed. He has friends in town, influential ones. He could make trouble for you. Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm not planning to throw punches, Miss Zimmerman, tempting as that might be. Violence just begets more violence. I'm thinking of something a bit more lasting. What do you mean? Edgar Wilkins cares about two things, money and his reputation. Hit him where it hurts in his business and his standing in town, and he'll back down. Sarah frowned. How could we possibly do that? Like I said, he has friends. But he also has enemies. People he's cheated, women he's harmed. Thomas leaned forward. And Guthrie's changing. The territorial governor is cracking down on lawlessness. With the right pressure from the right people. You really think it's possible? Sarah asked, not daring to hope. I do. But it will take time, and in the meantime, you need to be safe. Thomas hesitated. I have a proposition for you, Miss Zimmerman. I need someone to help manage the household at my ranch. My previous housekeeper left to marry last month, and things have been. Well, let's just say my cooking skills leave much to be desired. Sarah stared at him, surprised. Are you offering me a job? Yes. You'd have your own room, meals provided, and I'd pay you fair wages. More than fair, actually, since you'd be saving me from my own attempts at biscuits. His smile was warm and genuine. You mentioned you're a seamstress, and I reckon those skills would translate well to running a house. Plus, you'd be safely away from town and Wilkins. Sarah hesitated. The offer was tempting, very tempting, but she barely knew this man. Mr. Nash, while I appreciate your offer, I don't make a habit of accepting employment from men I've just met, especially not when it involves living in their homes. Thomas nodded, looking pleased rather than offended. I'd think less of you if you did, Miss Zimmerman. That's good sense talking. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Here's a letter from Mrs. Holloway. She'll vouch for me. And Sheriff Taylor knows me well. You can ask him about me too. I also employ 2 married couples who live on the property. You wouldn't be alone with me. Sarah took the letter, noting Mrs. Holloway's familiar handwriting. You came prepared. I figured you'd be cautious, as you should be. Take your time, think on it. Talk to folks in town about me. I'll come back tomorrow for your answer, if that suits you. The consideration he showed touched Sarah deeply. Most men would have been insulted by her hesitation, but Thomas Nash seemed to respect it. What about my cabin? I can't just abandon it. It'll keep. You can return whenever you wish, check on things. And when we've dealt with Wilkins, you can decide whether to stay at the ranch or come back here. Your choice, always. Sarah studied Thomas's face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motives, but found only sincerity in his steady gaze. Why are you doing this, Mr. Nash? The truth, please. Thomas was quiet for a moment. 8 years ago, my sister found herself in a situation not unlike yours. Different town, different man, same violence. I was away, driving cattle to Kansas. By the time I returned, his voice roughened. By the time I returned, she'd taken her own life, unable to bear the shame and pain any longer. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. I'm so sorry. Since then, I've made it my business to help where I can. I couldn't save her, but maybe. He met Sarah's eyes. Maybe I can help make sure the same fate doesn't befall someone else. The raw pain in his voice convinced Sarah of his sincerity more than any letter of recommendation could have. Still, she would be careful. I'll speak with Mrs. Holloway and Sheriff Taylor tomorrow. If what they say matches your story, I'll consider your offer. Thomas nodded and stood. That's all I ask? I'll return tomorrow afternoon. He placed his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. In the meantime, keep this locked and don't open it for anyone you don't know well. Sarah followed him to the door. Thank you, Mr. Nash, for checking on me and for caring what happens. Thomas, he said. My friends call me Thomas. Sarah, she replied softly. Rest well, Sarah. Things will look brighter tomorrow, I promise you that. As she watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, Sarah wondered if perhaps he was right. For the first time since Edgar Wilkins's attack, she felt a small flutter of something that might, with nurturing, grow into hope. The next morning, Sarah rose early, washed her face gingerly around the bruise, and pinned her honey-brown hair into a neat bun. She dressed in her plainest skirt and shirtwaist, determined to speak with Mrs. Holloway and Sheriff Taylor before Thomas Nash returned. The walk to town was tense, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of Edgar Wilkins. She reached Mrs. Holloway's shop without incident and slipped inside, the bell above the door announcing her arrival. Mrs. Holloway, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, gasped when she saw Sarah's face. Oh, my dear girl! Thomas told me what happened, but seeing it. She hurried around the counter. That monster! Sit down before you fall down. Sarah sank gratefully onto a chair. Mrs. Holloway, I need to ask you about Thomas Nash. He's offered me a position at his ranch, and you need to know if he's a good man. Mrs. Holloway finished for her. He is. One of the finest in the territory. He's built that ranch from nothing into something substantial, treats his workers fair, and I've never heard a woman speak ill of him. She patted Sarah's hand. His sister's tragedy hit him hard. Changed him. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's always the first to help when someone's in need. So you think I should accept his offer? Mrs. Holloway nodded firmly. I think you'd be a fool not to. Edgar Wilkins is a dangerous man, especially now that you've defied him. The ranch would be safe, and Thomas will treat you with respect. She smiled. Besides, that man could use some civilizing influence. His place is functional but about as warm as a prison cell. Next, Sarah visited the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taylor, a grizzled man with a silver mustache, confirmed everything Mrs. Holloway had said about Thomas. Nash is solid, the sheriff told her. Keeps his word, pays his debts. Never had to lock him up, which is more than I can say for most men around here. When Sarah mentioned Edgar's attack, the sheriff's expression darkened. Not the first time, won't be the last. Problem is, Wilkins has half the town council in his pocket. Makes bringing charges against him complicated. So there's nothing you can do? Sheriff Taylor sighed heavily. Didn't say that. Just said it's complicated. Nash has the right idea getting you out of town for now. He leaned forward. Between you and me, there's been talk of cleaning up Guthrie. Territorial governor's sending a federal marshal next month. Things might change then. By the time Sarah returned to her cabin, her mind was made up. She quickly packed her few belongings into a small trunk: clothes, books, her sewing supplies, and the locket containing miniature portraits of her parents. Everything she owned in the world fit inside one trunk with room to spare. Thomas arrived precisely when he'd said he would, driving a wagon with a team of sturdy horses. His eyes brightened when he saw her packed trunk. You've decided? Sarah nodded. I have. I accept your offer, Mr. Nash. Thomas with gratitude. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the plains. I'm glad to hear it. And please, no gratitude necessary. Having someone who can cook a decent meal is worth far more than I'll be paying you. As Thomas loaded her trunk into the wagon, Sarah took one last look at her little cabin. Despite its shortcomings, it had been her first real home in Oklahoma. We'll come back to check on it regularly, Thomas assured her, reading her thoughts. It'll be waiting whenever you want to return. The journey to Thomas's ranch took nearly 2 hours, leading them north of Guthrie into rolling prairie dotted with small stands of trees. As they traveled, Thomas pointed out landmarks and told stories about the area, his deep voice carrying easily over the sound of the wagon wheels. Land's good here, he explained. Better water than some parts. I was lucky to stake my claim when I did. How long have you been in Oklahoma Territory? Sarah asked. 7 years. Came down from Kansas after. He cleared his throat. After my sister passed. Needed a fresh start. The 82 land run gave me the chance. And you built your ranch from nothing? Pride touched Thomas's features. Started with 20 head of cattle and a tent. Now I've got over 300 head and a proper house. It's still growing, still becoming what I want it to be, but it's mine. The pride in his voice resonated with Sarah. She understood the satisfaction of creating something of your own, even if her ambitions had been considerably more modest. There it is, Thomas said eventually, gesturing ahead. Nash Ranch. Sarah looked where he pointed and caught her breath. Nestled in a gentle valley with a creek running through it sat a handsome 2-story house built of sturdy timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings flanked it: a barn, stables, and what looked like bunkhouses. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the lush grass. It's beautiful, Sarah said sincerely. Thomas looked pleased. It's home. As they pulled up to the house, a middle-aged couple emerged onto the porch. The woman was round and pleasant-looking with gray-streaked dark hair, while the man was tall and thin with a weathered face. Sarah, this is Martha and Daniel Johnson. Thomas introduced them. Daniel's my foreman, and Martha helps with the cooking for the ranch hands. Martha, Daniel, this is Sarah Zimmerman. She'll be taking over as housekeeper. Martha smiled warmly, though her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Sarah's bruise. "Welcome to Nash Ranch, Miss Zimmerman. We're mighty glad to have you." "Thank you," Sarah replied, relieved by the woman's genuine welcome. "I'm happy to be here. Martha will show you to your room and help you get settled," Thomas said. "I need to check on a new calf with Daniel, but I'll see you at supper." Martha led Sarah into the house, chatting companionably as they went. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with a large sitting room featuring comfortable-looking furniture, a dining room that could seat at least a dozen people, and a well-equipped kitchen that made Sarah's eyes widen. "Mr. Nash likes things simple but good," Martha explained. "He built most of this furniture himself, from the dining table to those bookshelves." The house was clean and functional, just as Mrs. Holloway had described, but it lacked warmth. No curtains at the windows, no rugs on the wooden floors, no pictures on the walls except for a single portrait of a young woman Sarah guessed must be Thomas's sister. Her bedroom was upstairs, a pleasant room with a large window overlooking the prairie. It contained a bed with a simple quilt, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk, and a rocking chair. "It's lovely," Sarah said, meaning it. After her tiny cabin, the room felt positively luxurious. "The bathroom is down the hall," Martha told her. "Mr. Nash insisted on indoor plumbing when he built this place. Said he'd had enough of outhouses in his life." She chuckled. "He may look like a rough cowboy, but that man appreciates civilization when he can get it." After helping Sarah unpack, Martha left her to rest before supper. Sarah sat on the edge of her new bed, absorbing the sudden change in her circumstances. Yesterday, she'd been huddled in her cabin, terrified and alone. Today, she was safe in a beautiful house, with a job and people who seemed genuinely kind. All because Thomas Nash had decided to help a woman he didn't even know. That evening, Sarah joined Thomas, the Johnsons, and the other married couple who worked at the ranch, the Petersons, who managed the horses, for supper in the dining room. Despite her nervousness, the meal was pleasant, the conversation flowing easily around her. No one mentioned her bruised face, though she caught concerned glances now and then. After the others had retired for the night, Thomas invited Sarah to join him on the porch. The summer night was warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of prairie grass. They sat in rocking chairs, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. "How are you finding everything?" Thomas asked. "Overwhelming, I imagine." "A little," Sarah admitted. "But in a good way. Everyone has been very kind. They're good people. The best." They rocked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Sarah spoke again. "What happens now? With Edgar Wilkins, I mean." Thomas's expression grew serious. "I've sent word to some people I know. Men who owe me favors, or who have their own reasons to want Wilkins taken down a peg. We'll gather evidence of his misdeeds, and there are plenty, and when the federal marshal arrives next month, we'll present our case." "Do you really think it will work?" "I do. But it will take time, Sarah. Are you prepared for that?" She nodded slowly. "I've learned patience these past few years. And I'm safe here, thanks to you." Thomas turned to look at her, his expression earnest in the fading light. "I meant what I said yesterday. About giving you a reason to smile again. Not just by dealing with Wilkins, but by showing you there's good in this world to balance out the bad. You've already done that," Sarah said softly. "By helping me when you had no obligation to do so." "It's a start," he replied. "But only a start." As the weeks passed, Sarah settled into life at Nash Ranch. Her duties as housekeeper kept her busy managing the household accounts, overseeing the cleaning, planning meals with Martha, and using her sewing skills to mend and occasionally make new items for the house. She found satisfaction in bringing order and comfort to the spacious but somewhat austere home. Almost without realizing it, she began adding small touches: wildflowers and simple vases, cushions she sewed from remnant fabric, curtains for the bare windows. Thomas never commented directly on these changes, but she often caught him looking at her handiwork with appreciative eyes. They fell into an easy rhythm together. Thomas would join her for breakfast before heading out to work with his cattle, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, his years as a young cowhand in Kansas, the sister he'd lost. In turn, Sarah shared stories of her life in Philadelphia, her parents, and the dreams she'd had before their deaths had forced her to become practical. "I always wanted to own a dress shop," she confided one evening in late July, nearly a month after coming to the ranch. "Not just work in one, but have my own. Design the dresses myself." "Why don't you?" Thomas asked, his tone genuinely curious. Sarah laughed softly. "Opening a business requires capital, which I don't have. And even if I did, a dress shop needs customers. Out here, there are women in Guthrie who'd appreciate fine dressmaking," Thomas pointed out. "Once Wilkins is dealt with, you could start small. Maybe work from here initially." The idea that he'd given thought to her dream warmed Sarah's heart. "Perhaps someday," she said. "For now, I'm content here." It was true. The bruise on her face had faded, and with it much of her fear. She felt safe at Nash Ranch, respected and valued. And increasingly she found herself looking forward to her evening conversations with Thomas, to the sound of his laughter, and the thoughtful way he listened when she spoke. One morning in early August, Thomas surprised her by appearing at breakfast in his best clothes, a dark suit and polished boots, his usually untamed hair neatly combed. "You look very handsome," Sarah said, then blushed at her own boldness. Thomas smiled, a slight flush touching his tanned cheeks. "Thank you. I'm heading into Guthrie today. The federal marshal arrived yesterday, and Sheriff Taylor sent word it's time to present our case against Wilkins." Sarah's heart began to race. "So soon? I thought it would be weeks yet. Things have moved faster than expected. Several of Wilkins's former companions have come forward with stories similar to yours. And we've gathered evidence of other misdeeds: cheating at cards, watering down his whiskey, failing to pay taxes on all his income." "Will I need to testify?" Sarah asked, her throat suddenly dry. Thomas shook his head. "Not unless you want to. Your written statement, combined with the others, should be sufficient." He hesitated. "But I did wonder if you might want to accompany me to town. To face him, on your terms this time. You'd be completely safe, I swear it." Sarah considered this. The thought of seeing Edgar Wilkins again made her stomach clench with anxiety. But there was also a part of her that wanted to look him in the eye, to show him she wasn't broken or cowering. "Yes," she decided. "I'll come with you." 2 hours later, Sarah sat beside Thomas in his wagon as they approached Guthrie. She wore her best dress, a navy blue cotton with white trim that she'd sewn herself, and had arranged her hair carefully. If she was going to face her tormentor, she would do so looking her strongest. Thomas seemed to sense her nervousness, and placed a reassuring hand over hers. "Remember, you're not alone this time." The simple touch, and his steady presence beside her, calmed her racing heart. She nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, where they found Sheriff Taylor in conversation with a tall, stern-looking man with a federal marshal's badge. "Thomas," Sheriff Taylor greeted them. "And Miss Zimmerman. Good timing. Marshal Wilson was just asking about you both." Marshal Wilson shook Thomas's hand, then Sarah's. "Miss Zimmerman, I've read your statement regarding Edgar Wilkins. Very clear and detailed, thank you." "What happens now?" Thomas asked. "We're bringing Wilkins in for questioning within the hour," Marshal Wilson explained. "Between Miss Zimmerman's statement, the other women who've come forward, and the evidence of financial improprieties, we have more than enough to arrest him." As if on cue, the door to the sheriff's office burst open, and 2 deputies entered, flanking a furious Edgar Wilkins. Sarah instinctively stepped closer to Thomas, who placed a protective arm around her shoulders. Edgar's bloodshot eyes landed on Sarah, and his face contorted with rage. "You," he spat. "This is your doing, isn't it? Lying about me to anyone who'll listen." Marshal Wilson stepped between them. Mr. Wilkins, I suggest you save your protests for the judge. We have multiple witnesses to your assault on Miss Zimmerman and others, not to mention evidence of tax evasion that the territorial government takes very seriously. Edgar struggled against the deputy's hold. This is absurd. I'm a respected businessman in this town. Not anymore, Sheriff Taylor said grimly. Lock him up, boys. Marshal Wilson and I have some more questions for him. As the deputies dragged Edgar away, he continued shouting threats and obscenities. Sarah stood tall, her chin lifted, refusing to flinch. She had expected to feel fear seeing him again, but instead, she felt only relief and a growing sense of justice. Thomas's arm remained around her shoulders. You all right? He murmured. Sarah nodded, suddenly aware of how natural it felt to be held by him, how safe she felt in his embrace. Yes. Better than I expected. After providing additional information to Marshal Wilson, they left the sheriff's office and walked down Guthrie's main street. Several people greeted Thomas warmly, and a few nodded respectfully to Sarah, including Mrs. Holloway, who rushed out of her shop to embrace her. You look well, dear, Mrs. Holloway said, studying Sarah's face. Life at Nash Ranch agrees with you. It does, Sarah admitted. I've found peace there. Mrs. Holloway's knowing smile suggested she thought Sarah had found more than just peace, but she didn't press the issue. Will you be returning to town now that Wilkins is being dealt with? The question caught Sarah off guard. She hadn't really considered what would happen next. Her agreement with Thomas had been premised on the threat from Edgar Wilkins. With that resolved, did he expect her to leave? I'm not sure, she answered honestly. Well, if you decide to come back, your job at the shop is still open, Mrs. Holloway assured her. Though I suspect Thomas Nash might have something to say about that. As they continued their walk through town, Thomas seemed unusually quiet. Finally, as they stopped to purchase supplies for the ranch, he turned to her. Mrs. Holloway raised a good question, he said carefully. Now that Wilkins is facing justice, you're free to return to your cabin, to your life in town. Is that what you want? Sarah looked up at him, studying the face that had become so dear to her over the past weeks, the crinkles around his eyes when he smiled, the strong line of his jaw, the warmth in his gaze whenever it rested on her. Is that what you want? She countered softly. For me to leave? Thomas's eyes widened. No, he said, the word almost a whisper. No, that's not what I want at all. What do you want, Thomas? He took a deep breath, then gently took her hands in his. I want you to stay. Not as my housekeeper, though you're welcome to continue in that role if it pleases you. But I want you to stay because I've fallen in love with you, Sarah. The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Sarah's heart soared at the declaration, at the sincerity shining in his eyes. When I came to your cabin that day, Thomas continued, I promised to give you a reason to smile again. I meant it then as a promise to bring you justice, to show you that not all men are like Wilkins. But as the weeks passed, I found myself wanting to be the reason for your smiles, to bring you joy each day for the rest of our lives. Sarah felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of happiness. You already are, she whispered. You've become my reason, Thomas. For smiling, for hoping, for believing in tomorrow. With gentle fingers, Thomas brushed a tear from her cheek. Does that mean you'll stay? Yes, Sarah said, a genuine smile breaking across her face. Yes, I'll stay. The look of pure joy that transformed Thomas's features was one Sarah knew she would treasure forever. Right there on the main street of Guthrie, with the afternoon sun warming their faces and curious onlookers all around, Thomas Nash drew Sarah into his arms and kissed her, a tender, reverent kiss that promised everything she never dared to hope for: safety, respect, love. When they parted, both a little breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. I think, he said softly, that we should visit Reverend Adams before we leave town. That is, if you're willing to become Mrs. Nash sooner rather than later. Sarah laughed, the sound bright and free. I thought you'd never ask. 3 months later, as autumn painted the prairie in gold and amber, Sarah stood on the porch of Nash Ranch, her home now in every sense of the word. She wore a simple but elegant cream-colored dress of her own design, her hair adorned with wildflowers. Behind her, the house hummed with activity as Martha, Mrs. Holloway, and several other women from town prepared for the celebration to follow. Thomas waited for her at the end of the garden path, standing beneath an arch of twisted branches that the ranch hands had constructed according to Sarah's design. Beside him stood Daniel Johnson and Sheriff Taylor, while Marshal Wilson, who had stayed on in Guthrie after successfully prosecuting Edgar Wilkins, sat among the small gathering of guests. As Sarah walked toward her soon-to-be husband, a smile lit her face, not the forced smile Edgar Wilkins had demanded, but a true expression of the joy that filled her heart. Thomas had kept his promise. He had given her a reason to smile again, to believe in goodness and second chances. When she reached him, Thomas took her hands in his eyes shining with love. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered. "And you," Sarah replied, "are the kindest, bravest, most honorable man I've ever known." As they exchanged their vows before Reverend Adams, Sarah thought of the journey that had brought her here, the pain and fear, yes, but also the courage, the friendship, and ultimately, the love that had transformed her life. That evening, after the guests had departed and the newlyweds were alone, Thomas led Sarah to the porch where they had spent so many evenings in conversation. But this time, instead of separate rocking chairs, a new bench swing hung from the rafters, wide enough for two. "I made it for us," Thomas explained, a touch of nervousness in his voice. "So we can watch the sunset together every night if you'd like." Sarah's heart swelled with tenderness. "It's perfect," she said, sitting down and patting the space beside her. "Just like everything else about this day." As Thomas joined her on the swing, pulling her close against his side, Sarah rested her head on his shoulder and gazed out at the land that was now truly her home. In the distance, a herd of cattle grazed peacefully, while closer to the house, flowers she had planted nodded in the gentle breeze. "Happy?" Thomas murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Sarah turned her face to his, a smile blooming on her lips, the smile of a woman who had found not just safety, but joy, not just respect, but love. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully, before rising up to meet his kiss as the sun painted the western sky in shades of promise.